cupboard. But now you're gonna leave with nothing but a sign. Another evening I'll be sitting reading in between your lines, because I miss you all the time. So get away, another way to feel what you did on yourself, to know and let yourself go. You know you did lose your self-control. There's snow with the rainbow. Turn away, another way to be where you did let yourself go. Let yourself go. Is that nice? So what do you wanna play? What's your point of view? There's no price. Where do you wanna go? Handshake with you. What's your point of view? I don't talk for you. I don't wanna go. 'Cause I really wanna stay at your house and balance your song. But you know how much you brought me all undone. You remain dumb. You wanna know.
It's one of those topics that really just bifurcates the entire audience. And I gain subscribers and I lose subscribers every time. And I still don't care. We're going to talk about it because we have somebody willing to do so. So let's get into it. He has a plan, she has a plan, and you get to pay for it regardless.
The best way to get someone motivated is to stand for something strongly, deeply, passionately.
Subscribe to Disenthrall. Do as you're told.
Today's guest is named Seth. He's a husband, father, and has a YouTube channel called Utah Gun Guy. Welcome to the show, man. How are you?
Thank you. Doing good.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So this is a very rare show, ladies and gentlemen. Rare for several reasons. Oftentimes on social media, most of the time on social media, the discussions are completely useless. Worse than useless. They're regressive. They are poo-flinging fights that don't help anybody learn anything or change anyone's mind. And some of you, the people that have followed me for a while, would have known by now that oftentimes on social media, one of the ways I very quickly, very early on, determine if the person that I am talking to is sort of being genuine and worth the time is I invite them to leave the keyboard behind and come on the show or join our Discord server and have a voice discussion, because having real discussions is how you really learn things and how you change people's minds. And the people that are willing to do that are the people that are genuine, if nothing else. They may not agree with you. They may never change their mind, but at least they're standing behind their positions that are willing to talk about it. And this is one of the rare guys, Seth. I'm good on you, man.
Well, thank you. I try. I like to think I believe what I say.
Well, yeah, certainly. So that's what happened. Really quickly, we bumped into each other on Twitter because that's how it happens. I guess we probably both follow a friend of mine named Jason Bassler, who tweeted this edgy tweet. Don't call yourself a freedom advocate if you spank your kids. Freedom starts in the home and, more importantly, in the mind, which is exactly why authoritarian violence should never be normalized. To which Seth responded by quote tweeting and saying, a lot of what libertarians say resonates with me. Then they have horrendously bad takes like this. Children cannot be left without boundaries. That's how you get kids punching and kicking their parents when they don't buy them a toy at the store. To which yours truly responded, only people that were spanked think spanking is needed to create boundaries. So that is the precursor to the show. We're going to talk about spanking, parenting, probably some moral philosophy mixed in there, self-ownership mixed in there. But first, I know nothing about Seth, so I want to take a moment to just sort of find out about you. Where are you? What do you do? And what do you label yourself as politically?
I really I struggle with the political one, so we're not going to start there.
Okay.
We'll start with, I'm married. I have 3 kids. I live in Utah, hence the Utah gun guy. I am a very loud proponent of the Second Amendment. As of recently, I decided, I was like, you know what, the internet's there. I might as well say what I believe. I've kind of kept quiet for a long time and decided to get out there and be a little louder, which has gotten me into trouble. This was totally by accident because I follow a lot of libertarians. I like libertarians, but this is where my political compass thing gets a little mixed up. I'm also very conservative. I don't like the Republican Party. I really like Rand Paul and Thomas Massie. So it's like politically, I don't know what you would call me. I've taken that compass test and I'm like right-leaning libertarian-esque-ish. I am a Christian, so that is going to underpin my moral philosophies, which is probably where some disagreement may pop up here and there. It popped up with some other people in that Twitter thread.
You know what? If there's something else that happened in that Twitter thread, I literally didn't read anyone else's replies. So if something happened, I don't know about
some
it.
Some were good, some were not.
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, that's going to be...
It's Twitter, right? You know? And that's something I found very freeing about Twitter is I can say what I want. And if I want to respond to someone, I can. If not, I just let them shout into the wind and I hit the mute button.
Oh, interesting. I just saw that Jason Bassler actually responded. Interesting.
He did respond. What really surprised me, though, is that this blew up like a week after I quote tweeted it or something. It was really random for me. I saw my notifications like, wait, what? We're on this? Okay.
Yeah. It's a hot button issue because here's my theory. Because when you challenge somebody on this topic of spanking, and I'm kind of speaking from personal experience, I was spanked quite frequently when I was young. When you challenge someone's belief on spanking, you're not challenging that person's belief. I find that you're actually challenging that person's belief that their parents were good people. Because anytime you challenge anything that someone's parents did, you're basically, endangering to some degree, even to a minimal degree for some people. You're challenging sort of that relationship that's built on something that may or may not be ethical or moral, which is a very deep topic. And it's not something that like the people on Twitter can just talk shit and call you names. Like that's not going to get to any of the root things going on in your head about it. And then so just for my background on it, a couple of years ago, I started the Peaceful Parenting University. There's a series of videos you can find on that YouTube channel where I walk people through very, very practical advice on how to parent without force, without violence, and without consent or property violations. For further background on myself, I almost say I have 2 sets of children. I have an older daughter. She's in her 20s now. I parented her as I was parented, very, very forcefully, very, a lot of spanking, a lot of authoritarian sort of control and rules, very, very traditional, especially for the South. That's just how everybody parents here in Texas. I'm assuming where you're from as well. That's just how it's done. And in fact, if you don't do it that way, you get called a bad parent. Like that's very normal. And then I have 2 younger kids, who are now growing up very quickly. That they're almost 3 years old. They were 3 years old. Excuse me, I said that wrong. They were 3 years old before they ever saw a human yell at another human. And they're now approaching 10 years old. They have never been hit or controlled or had their property disrespected in any way in my home. And we can definitely get into how all that works to whatever degree you're interested in getting into it. But I think why don't we go back to, and I'll shut up for a while and just maybe let you talk about why you wanted to tweet that and what your thoughts are on these fucking peaceful parenting libertarian types.
So I actually will say my issue with the tweet in question was not the diss on spanking, because I don't think people have to spank their children. I don't even tell people how they have to raise their children. I don't think I should be telling other parents how to raise their children. My issue is more spanking, I think, gets conflated with child abuse, and I don't think that's appropriate. And then the idea, it seemed, and it became clear that I may have been mistaken that he wasn't advocating for no boundaries, but it appeared in that tweet that he was kind of advocating that children don't need boundaries because freedom starts in the home. And I was like, well, so I reacted to with that in mind, and that kind of sparked all of this.
Isn't that interesting? That is what social media does to us as a species. We see a short amount we see 255 characters from somebody. We project onto those words what we think that they mean, or what we feel that they mean, or how we just sort of took them in, and then we rebut what we thought they meant. This is like the problem with all social media. Okay, so you're not saying, let me just be clear, because I want to say you're walking it back, but so I'm not walking it back. I don't believe spanking is child abuse, and I think it's okay. I don't think it's the only right way to parent. Okay. In what situation would you find it to be okay to spank your child?
So for me personally, I reserve it for very important things, and as kind of like a last straw. So again, I have 3 kids. I don't spank them very often. In fact, for the most part, they don't need it, I don't think. But occasionally there will come a time where there is like, I am going to either have to physically pick them up and move them because I told them to go do something and they're absolutely refusing. This was more in the younger toddler stage. As they've gotten older, I think my kids are pretty well behaved. But like, for example, if I would tell my child, okay, you're in timeout, go sit down, you punched your brother or sister, whatever, and they just utterly refuse. They put their foot down, they're not going anywhere. I view that as a good time to be like, okay, you are not the actual authority here. I believe that parents do have authority over their children. I don't think I don't think the state is equivalent to the parent. I'll throw that out there because that ended up someone pointing out state and parent anyway in the Twitter thread. So I think there's a difference there, but I do think parents have a level of authority. And this is, again, my Christianity is going to come into play here. That is God-given as my responsibility to raise these children. I think I am an authority figure for them that they need to learn to listen to, obey, respect. And I try and do that as lovingly as possible. But I do believe that there's going to be a time, and has been in all my children's lives, where they've needed a swat on the butt. And I would also like to point out, a swat on the butt, not done in anger. I'm not smacking them upside the head. I'm not, I think I understand why people are opposed to it, because they think it very easily can probably lead to other types of hitting or beating. I just don't think that it has to be that way either, and shouldn't be that way.
Okay. I don't think that you can mark any non-arbitrary distinction between spanking out of love and hitting in an abusive way. Both is the exact same physical act. It's just the intent that changes. And I'm not sure that that's a real material difference, but maybe you can explain that to me. But one of the other things I wanted to say was that it's amazing how spanking and your relationship with your children is at the nexus of all of your other worldviews. So it touches on your religion, your faith, your political persuasion, because your political persuasion necessarily involves your belief in an authority that is the government, versus an authority that is God, versus an authority that is the parent in a home. Like, this is all the same. This is all interrelated. And it's hard to really talk about one without affecting the others. So that's why I started out by asking, like, what are your politics? And you told me about your religion, stuff like that. So if I'm trying to convince you that you are not a valid authority in that sort of coercive role in your home, I can't just stop there. I have to also convince you that there is no such thing as a valid authority in government, and that there's no valid coercive authority
Right.
in God, right? Like I can't take one of those, one of the trifecta down without talking to all three. So this is challenging, and I'm happy to go wherever you'd like to go and push back wherever I can. But why don't I mean, like, I'll just take the position that there's no such thing as an involuntary authority in the home or anywhere else. Your kids are in your possession, let's say, through no voluntary action on their part, non-consensually, so to speak. They didn't get a say in the matter. And that means that we should be more deferential to their consent and property and the integrity of their body and their autonomy to not get hit and controlled than if they were there voluntarily. Like if they signed an agreement that says, yeah, I want you to be my dad and I agree to your rules for, to live under your roof, then okay, now we have a two-way contract with consent and property rights involved, and whatever authority you have is only authority that they gave you. But in the case of kids, they gave you no such authority. They're not there consensually. So what right do you have, and from where might it come, to coerce or to strike the property of another non-consensually?
So first, so obviously we're going to come to a fundamental disagreement level here when it comes to the authority structure, but that's okay. I would like to go back real quick to you called it an arbitrary difference between spanking and hitting, or spanking and abuse. I think I have a slightly unique perspective on this because I actually was physically abused as a child.
So was I.
Okay. So I think it's interesting. You can have two people who go through that who could come out with a different perspective on it. But my perspective is informed largely on the difference between how I spank my children and how I was hit. Mm-hmm. Like it's a very, very different thing in my mind, and I mean in my actions. So I would say that intent is not the only difference there.
Well, what other differences would there be?
Sorry. So I don't pin my kids up against the wall, holding them up off the ground. I don't hit them anywhere but their butt, and I don't hit them all that hard. It's quite different. I was beat to the point where I couldn't sit down, black and blue kind of deal. And I would be very clear here. I'm not throwing anyone under the bus. My dad and I have reconciled. We are on extremely good terms, have a good relationship. He has apologized. He knows he was very wrong in what he did. So there's no animosity there. It's just a matter of fact kind of thing that I think pertains to this discussion.
That's wild. I mean, it's not what we're here to talk about, but I would love to hear a story of how, what kind of apology would it take for somebody that has done those things to me to make me say I'm on really good terms with them again. I can't even imagine an apology. Like there would have to be, I don't know, probably lots of money involved. They would have to voluntarily offer to, I don't know, be my fucking slave for a term of years or pay for years of therapy. I don't know. But if somebody had held me up against the wall and beaten me to where I couldn't sit down, I mean, I'm not sure. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. But so you're saying that it's basically a matter of degree, though. That is the distinction for you. Like there's a line, and you listed some of those lines. Like you have to only hit in a certain location on another person's body to make it not abuse, or you have to.
Well, I think so. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Sorry.
No, I mean, I was actively trying to repeat back your position to you. So if I'm getting it wrong, please interrupt.
I was just going to add to it. I think like if your child is reaching for a hot pan on the oven for their safety, I have no problem if you want to like real quick kind of smack their hand either. That might get me in more trouble, but there we are. I wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah. So spanking for emergency situations is a discussion I'm happy to have for sure. But for the sake of like, we got to stay on a track or we're never going to get anywhere. And part of it is my fault.
Yep.
So,
but no, totally fair.
It's a matter of degree when I think the justification or the ethics of the situation is an on-off switch. So like, if I rob you for $1 or for $20 or for $500, it's no less theft if it's $1 instead of 500. And the debate I'm looking to convince you of is the on or off part, not the matter of degree part. If you have a right to hit somebody in the butt, like, what non-arbitrary thing tells you that you can hit them in the face or that you can't hit them in the face? Like, where does this come from? And how is it not like hopelessly subjective?
The reason I don't think it's hopelessly subjective is you're not going to injure a child by smacking them on the butt, like open hand, just smack. That's not going to injure them. You're not breaking bones. It's a very fleshy part. It's going to sting for 10 seconds. They might, and a lot of this, where it comes from, is going to be tradition, right? Tradition, Christian tradition, parenting tradition, and personal experience. So looking for effective ways to parent. Obviously, I can't say obviously. I read a lot of parenting books. When I started to become a dad, I became a dad at the age of 20. I just turned 20, and a month later, my first son was born. I got married at 19. Excuse me. And so it was like, I was pretty young getting into this, and I wanted to know how to do it right. I looked at a lot of various ways. I looked at the way my wife was raised. I looked at the way I was raised. I was like, okay, we're not doing it the way both of us were raised. We're going to do this our own way. And I have 12 nieces and nephews, and each family parents differently. And, I'm like, okay, you guys can parent your way. We're parenting our way. And I believe the proof is in the pudding to some degree, as far as, again, I'm not throwing anyone under the bus. I love all my nieces and nephews. I do think my kids are the most well-behaved. And I'm not the only parent that spanks in this group of families. But so, yeah, it comes from a lot of things. It's not just one simple. I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, I mean, you kind of did, but I think you may have inadvertently made it worse for yourself. You basically said that the line is injury. So as long as I don't break a bone, I can pin them up against the wall, and I can hit them in other locations, as long as it's just a stinging pain that I provide, and no actual like injuries I would need to see a doctor about or something like that. That's the implication of what you said. I want to give you a chance to respond though, because I think at this point you can kind of see fair. I think you can kind of see how we're like lost in a gray area because there is no line, which is to my point.
Okay, yeah. So the reason I think there is a line is because of I believe in absolute morality as a Christian. So I do believe that there is a big difference, morally speaking. I think you're confusing categories when you start to hurt someone, like harm someone, inflicting harm versus a stinging pain to help them realize, okay, so again, we'll use let's say your child's real quick about to run in front of a car on the road. Another time that I have spanked my child, almost ran out in front of a car, and toddlers can't reason. To a very little degree. Quick smack on the butt. They're wearing pants and a diaper. It's not harmful by any stretch of the imagination. Now, if I were to smack that child across the face, that's morally wrong. Like I am at that point, I think, trying to hurt the child. I see a huge difference between the two.
There's a lot. I mean, I think you just made that distinction up because that's not in the Bible, for one. I think that's just how you were parented, and that's how you were raised, and that is the line that feels normal. And I speak from personal experience. That is the line that felt normal to me too. So that's how I was raised. That's how I was parented. That type of hitting would be acceptable the way I was raised and in my family. But let's take the running into the road as like a case study, and let's like drill down into it. Like, and let me just start by asking questions to try and figure out more about how you see the responsibility of parenting. So whose responsibility would you say it is to protect your children and keep them safe?
Oh, absolutely mine.
I absolutely agree. Whose responsibility isn't if not for us, right? So in a situation in which the kid is about to come to grievous harm, whose responsibility is it to prevent that?
Mine.
And if they are about to or are in a situation of imminent grievous harm, whose fault is that?
Oh, definitely mine.
So how does the logic work where we have a responsibility which we absolutely failed at, and so we get to hit them for it?
So I see the point you're making when it comes to, I believe because I am the authority, the ultimate responsibility falls on me. So I'm going to use a example of riding a horse, because I actually live on a ranch and I live in Utah. You know,
I'm
when
jealous.
you're training a horse,
Except for the snow, I'm jealous.
It's cool. Well, weirdly, we're getting a lot of snow this year. We live in the desert, and now we have a lot of water, and it's really strange. But so when it comes to training a horse, for example, if I am riding that horse, I give it a cue, say with my spurs, I want it to do something. It doesn't listen. Ultimately, the failure is on me if I don't correct it quickly, too, because a horse, if you don't correct it quickly, will not understand what you're attempting to correct it for later. So, and again, there's a difference between, I think, beating a horse with reins and jabbing it with my spurs. PETA would disagree. So I see this in a similar light. When you're training someone or training an animal, you have to do things quickly to help them remember where they went wrong. Ultimately, though, as the person in charge, it does fall on my shoulders. It's I tell my kids when we watch A Bug's Life, I'm like, I know he's the bad guy, but he's actually right. When you're in first rule of leadership, everything is your fault. It's like he's actually right. I know he's the bad guy, but
so
he's right.
So shouldn't you have been the one getting the SWAT for forgetting to do your job?
So scenario wise, it's not a forgetting to do your job, right? Now it could be, but each scenario is going to be different.
If anybody gets hit, if anybody gets hit, shouldn't it be you because you're the one that failed to do their job?
So if a child, so two different scenarios of a child running in front of a car. Okay, one, the parent's not paying attention. That parent failed in that. My scenario specifically, child rips out of your grasp and takes off sprinting because they see something they want to go touch. Ultimately, still my fault. The child shouldn't be pulling out of my grasp. Maybe I should have held on tighter, etc. But the child did something to break these boundaries at the same time. So it's you have to enforce boundaries. Again, in this scenario, I thought it was appropriate to spank. I don't think people have to. Like, if you don't want to, I don't think you have to. I think you can probably come up with a way to enforce a boundary, but
so yeah. Like, isn't it? Wouldn't a more, let me put it this way, wouldn't a more ethical response be to take that responsibility, to own it, to make sure that the environment your kid is in is safe, or make sure that you are there in the way to prevent them from running into the street, or that whatever is dangerous in the room, like, I don't know, like an open flame on the stove in the kitchen, for example, like to make sure that there's some barrier in the way, or to make sure that there's a person there that can, absolutely prevent the damage to your kid, things like these. Like, this is your responsibility. We agree on that. This is our responsibility. Mm-hmm. It is our job to do the work beforehand, before it becomes an emergency situation where we have to take immediate action to prevent harm. And then if we get to the point where we failed at our responsibility to keep them safe, then wouldn't it be a more moral or more ethical response to use the minimum amount of force necessary to rectify the situation? So that might be picking them up or pulling them out of the way or grabbing them away from the curb rather than hitting.
I do believe in minimum amount of force, but minimum amount can still be force. So I would like to go back real quick to the preventative stuff you've talked about, or you mentioned. because another example pops up. I don't personally have a wood stove. My brother-in-law has a wood stove. They have a baby gate around it so their children can't get to it. You can't keep an eye on your children all the time. And children are children. And he's had kids try and climb it, and he's caught them halfway over the baby gate trying to get to touch the wood stove while it's on. So that's a scenario where you can do X amount of things to stop your child from getting in there, but you can't. I mean, I don't think you're advocating for being a what do they call it? A hovering parent, where they're always watching their children. You believe in letting children have some semblance of freedom to go off and experience and do things. So how would, I guess I would question, like, how would that play into your, you failed if you have actually set up barriers there?
I think it's commensurate with the risk, right? Like if there's an open flame and I'm talking and I'm looking and I have a toddler, then I don't think there is a situation in which it's okay to leave them alone and then hit them when they climb the fence. That doesn't make sense to me. Like if I have an open flame, then I'm damn sure going to be there to make sure that the kid stays safe. Yeah, because that's my job.
What about a 7 or 8 year old kid who has a mind of their own?
It's my job. Like when we create children, and now we're going to get into self-ownership, property rights, and where authority does or doesn't come from. But when I create a human, they are in my care against their consent. They are self-owners just as much as I am and have every right to their body as I do. For me to hold any kind of additional authority over them that they didn't consent to would require some sort of justification or source for that authority, which you would have to prove. Like, and this goes to the government. Like, where does the authority of the government come from? I challenge you there. We can have that talk if you want. But it's the same thing. Like in the situation with your family and your kids, who would you say owns your children?
Oh, me. Absolutely. This is where we're going to have a disagreement. I don't think my children as children, one, I don't think consent. I do believe children can't consent.
I agree.
Their brains are developing. Okay. So they can't consent to me being authority, whether they wanted to or not. So I am their authority. I do own them in the respect of I own their safety. I own their well-being. I own they're not slaves by any stretch of the imagination, but I own all of the responsibility in taking care of them, providing for them, and training them.
Okay, I want to make sure that we're not equivocating all over the map with the word ownership and property. Like, when I ask who owns your kid, I'm saying there's a piece of human body property there, physical human body. Who owns that?
Okay, yeah, they have to take responsibility for their own selves, if that's what you're...
No, so like I would define ownership as the right to exclude others from the use of a thing. That's kind of a nerdy philosophical definition, but I think it's the most accurate one. If you own something, it means you have the right to say, I'm the only one that gets to touch, use, or whatever this thing. I am the sovereign owner of this thing, and you can't use it. That's quintessential property ownership. So when I'm asking, like, who owns your kid's body, that's what I'm looking for. Who do you think owns that body property?
Under that definition, I'm going to say it's mixed. And an example I'm going to draw on that maybe if we dig deeper into it, it'd fall apart. I haven't put a lot of thought into it. But military, they join the military. Now, you'd be like, oh, well, drafting, obviously, I think we're both going to agree is not okay.
I'm glad that we agree on that.
Yeah, I think we'll find a lot of common ground, I think, when it comes to politics. But so I guess where it would fall apart for you would be someone joins the military voluntarily. They're giving up the ownership of their body. So I can see, like, you push down, it'll fall apart as an analogy from that perspective. However, again, as a parent, and this is where we need to go, I think, with conversation, is where the authority of a parent comes from, how much right they have to exercise it over a child, because you're viewing a child as an independent, I lost my train of thought.
Well, so just to
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, let me bring it back. So self-ownership is obviously what I'm going for here. So whatever argument you use to say that you own yourself, for it to be valid and universalizable, it has to apply to your kids too. Now, I think the distinction that you're probably feeling between ownership and the responsibilities that you definitely have, like if my neighbor owns themselves, but I'm not in any way responsible for them or their safety or what they do. With our kids, there is a bunch of responsibilities there, and I kind of get the impression that that's what you're trying to mix in with the ownership. Like they are self-owners, but I also have all of these responsibilities that bind me to them and give me positive obligations to take care of them, to feed them, to protect them, to educate them, and make sure that they hit adulthood with a well-functioning body that is not damaged and mentally scarred. I'm pretty sure we agree on that much. And the analogy that I like to say, and you might agree with this, is my kids own themselves 100%. They have full ownership of their body. But until they reach the point where they're able to take sort of possession of themselves, it's sort of like I have somebody else's property, and it's my job to take care of that property in the way its owner would want me to, until they reach adulthood and they take full sort of self-possession of their property, and I turn it over to them. And I hope I get a passing grade from them when I do. Like, hey, so I took care of your property as well as I could, and now it's yours to take care of. I hope you think I did a good job. That's how I see the parent-child relationship. We take on a positive obligation to someone else's property by choosing to sort of bring it into existence in our family. They're not there. They didn't get a say. They don't consent to it, and that kind of adds to the onus on us to take extra special care of the property. What do you think?
No, on the surface, I like that analogy. I'm going to think about it more, obviously, but it does sound like a pretty good analogy.
So let's go to what you, I think, wanted to talk about next, which was the source of authority. Because I don't think we can go anywhere without
right
getting into that. Do you think that there is any just authority in the government? Why don't we do government first? Because that's easier than God.
So this is where the libertarians are all going to shoot me.
I bet they wouldn't shoot you.
well, it depends. Depends on what I'm advocating for in government, right?
True.
And if I decide to try and enforce it.
Yep.
So I believe there is a justifiable authority in government insofar as the people have given it. So like, I do believe our Constitution lays out, these are things you're allowed to do. You're not allowed to do these things. And our government has obviously utterly failed to stay within the bounds of the founders. I do believe too, as a Christian, that there is an inherent authority that the government has, because the Bible says that God has appointed those who are in authority over you for a reason. Maybe it's judgment, maybe it's for your good. It's going to depend on who's in charge.
Have you seen Biden? Do you really think?
I have.
Do you really think a perfect, all-knowing, all-good God said, "Oh, Biden's the one he needs"?
So actually, unironically, yes, because God's purpose. I think right now specifically, and I don't know if you'll agree with this either. Your arguments seem to tell me you might. So I am obviously, I think it'd be obvious, I'm very pro-life. So your whole bodily autonomy argument, I wonder, does it go to the pro-life? Because I've met non-pro-life libertarians and such. So it'd be an interesting, but that's a sidebar. But when it comes to government authority,
abortion is murder and is only justifiable in cases of rape. And we can get into that if you want, but it's a separate topic.
So that's an interesting topic that I think you would have a hard time justifying why rape is okay to kill a baby. But anyway, that's, again, sidebar. It would be a fun discussion though. But when it comes to the government's authority in, I got sidetracked on abortion. I believe the authority comes from God.
Abortion does
yes,
that.
I do actually believe Joe Biden. Oh, because of abortion, I would say. I would point to the fact that the millions of babies that have been, as you've said, murdered since Roe v. Wade was enacted is a good reason for God to appoint someone like Joe Biden over our country to run it into the ground. I'm not saying that's what's going on, by the way. I'm not speaking for God. I'm just saying I could see that as a good reason, a justification for our nation being judged.
Oh well, this is a wild chat. Okay, so I don't think it's in the Christian faith either. I grew up Pentecostal Christian, so I'm familiar.
Oh, okay.
I don't believe that it's in the faith to collectivize morality. I think even from a Christian perspective, I don't think it's acceptable. I don't think God ever judges people as a collective. It's usually individual sin that sends you to hell, so to speak, or gives you judgment. Now, I think I'm wrong. I can now think it, like, for example, the Egyptians. Like, God just murdered
Right.
a bunch of.
I could point to a lot of examples where God does judge an entire nation, including the nation of Israel, his people in the Old Testament. I can't imagine. He judges nations quite often.
I can't imagine how you can defend that from a moral perspective. We can get into
because
that
it comes down. We could, but that'll get into a real fun one, because then it comes down to justifying your own moral standard and where that comes from. Which I do believe this question has to at some point inevitably end up at, because you keep talking about, well, is this ethical or is this moral? It's like, well, where does your standard of morality come from? Right. And mine obviously comes from scripture, my faith as a Christian, and my belief that God has the right to establish the morals. Yours is going to come from, I would assume, a more independent, like, you have a conscience, you take ownership for yourself, your actions, and the libertarian philosophy of like victimless crimes, and that where as long as you're not hurting someone else or infringing on their rights, you're not doing anything wrong. Am I correct in assuming that's where you're coming from?
Kind of. I'm an odd one, like, I'm an individual for sure. I have a lot of disagreements with libertarians, or people that I should say. I have a lot of disagreements with people that call themselves libertarians. But anyway, so one thing I didn't want to miss, though, was that you said that I'm concerned with the ethical argument. I'm mainly concerned with the ethical argument because there's only two sides to the argument. There's practical and there's ethical, like what is and what ought be. And the practical side of it, to my mind, and if you disagree, I would be really surprised, because this is well known now. The studies have been done, and over 100 studies, and then there's meta studies done on the studies that show that spanking, from a practical, is it effective, is it useful perspective, like, it's obviously settled. Spanking your children lowers or raises their risk on every category of negative outcome across the board. The only one that it's effective at is getting immediate deference or immediate obedience in the short term, like in the moment. But beyond that, it hurt. I mean, higher chance of criminality, higher chance of abusing their spouses, higher chance of substance abuse, higher chance of, did I already say criminality? Like, every single person in prison was spanked. Like, it's just, from a practical, I didn't address the practical argument. Maybe I should have, because the science, the research is so abundantly clear on the negative outcomes you get from spanking. I'm focused on the ethical one, because to me, that's the realm I exist in. Like, I don't, like, even if the studies were wrong and it was hella effective and it produced better outcomes across the board, but it was immoral, then I don't care. I'm not doing it because it's immoral. So that's why I focus on the morality side.
Well, I think that's more important, because as we've seen, I think the science being settled is generally a good thing to question, in recent years anyway. And maybe you disagree with that. But again,
Well, I mean that bears addressing because that's the line that I give people all the time now after what we've experienced with COVID. But it's not.
Mhm.
It's not. The difference is the longer a study has been going on, the better science
Mhm.
does at it. So if
Yeah.
if a bunch of scientists get together and say they've invented a magic cure for this brand new disease that was discovered 6 months ago, chances are the cure is going to suck. They don't really know what the hell they're doing, and the research is bad. Like, science is a slow process, and the longer a theory has been around, the higher the chance that there's more truth involved in it. And I don't think there's a valid comparison between the 2-year fascistic tyranny and science. Medical science has absolutely just debased itself in the last 2 years. Like, they have completely embarrassed themselves. They have certainly eroded all sorts of trust for very justified reasons. But I don't think there's a valid comparison to the insanity that happened in a 2-year time span to sort of long-running, very well-tested research done on the effects of spanking. I think those are in different categories.
That's fair to a point, I think. Obviously, the last 2 years, now we're in year 3. Wow, 3 years to slow the spread, right? But when it comes to long-standing scientific things, I don't know where you stand on this. I am highly skeptical of our climate emergency. And again, totally different topic, but I think long-term scientific studies it doesn't necessitate it being unpoliticized or that there's no agenda behind it. And I'm not saying like there's some grand conspiracy to stop people from disciplining their children.
That would be a weird conspiracy.
That'd be a really weird one. Although, if
and also you slipped in a word
discipline,
you slipped in a word discipline, which I have to call out just because that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying spanking, hitting. It's not the same thing as disciplining. I think you would agree, but I have to call it out because people will sneak that into this discussion.
So that might be a point of disagreement. I do believe that spanking is a form of discipline. It's a form of disciplinary action. At least that's,
sure.
That's
so
what I would use it for. Yeah,
shooting somebody and whipping them would also be forms of disciplinary action. It's just it's a matter of degree in the same category. And chastising someone verbally. Chastising someone verbally is a form of disciplining somebody. Sure, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm assuming you don't think words are violence.
No, but I mean,
okay, good.
When there's two uses, there's two usages of the word discipline, right? Discipline means sort of self-regulating one's abilities, denying oneself, having a high time preference, stuff like that, not doing that stuff, or sort of punitively punishing someone would also be a different way to talk about discipline. And I don't.
So to be clear,
go ahead.
Sorry, when I said discipline, I was definitely speaking of the punitive punishment.
Right.
In that scenario. Yeah.
Cool. All right. I just had to call out the word discipline because it gets snuck in. Okay. So from a practical perspective, you disagree on the research
the
on
effectiveness
spanking?
of it?
Yeah.
I do.
And what basis do you have for that disagreement?
This is going to make me sound really smart in your opinion. As someone actually in your chat they put spare the rod, spoil the child. That's not exactly what the Bible says about it, but the Bible speaks of physical discipline being appropriate in a couple instances. And as my foundation for morality and for life is what I believe to be the Word of God, that's going to set my standard over and against, whatever someone might say. And to be fair, I have gone and looked at the research. I do think they conflate spanking with abuse often. And I think, to be fair to them, a lot of times spanking turns into abuse. People can abusively spank their children because there is a degree to it, I think.
My position is that all
arbitrary.
My position is all spanking is abuse, but I think to draw a line in there, you have to have a justification for that line. To say, okay, no, this is not abuse, and this is, and here's the line. You're going to need a very clear, strong justification for just drawing that line. Otherwise, it's arbitrary, and you're just kind of telling me how you feel that that's not abuse, and you feel that that is abuse. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't care about your feelings on the matter. I need justification. My question though, and I want to try and reflect back to make sure I understand what you're saying. So my question was, I don't even remember my question now. Hold on. You were talking. You saw
were
the
on
comment.
the practical point for a second.
Oh yes, I said, what justification do you have to not believe or to disbelieve or to disagree with the research? And I think you said, you referred to a comment, but I think what you were trying to get at was, God tells me to do it, therefore it must have better outcomes because God wouldn't tell me to do something that had worse outcomes. Is that your position?
It's overtly simplified, but sure.
Well, I wasn't trying to be reductive.
Yeah, no, it's not intentional. No. Yeah, I believe that as a Christian, that the word of God is actually God's word, and as God being God, when the Bible tells me something is right, I don't think there's anyone who can tell. I'm not going to believe anyone, I should say, who tells me it's not, because this is the foundation of my faith. Now, I would also point out, I was raised a Christian, and then I became not really an atheist. I became an agnostic for an extended period of time, and had to very slowly work my way back to even believing in any sort of personal God at all, to where I'm at now is probably even more serious of a Christian than I was when I was raised one. So it was an interesting journey there, which helped shape all of my perspectives on things now.
Would God tell you to do something that would harm you? Or
to harm, as in,
like, would God give you? Would God order
examples?
Right. Yeah. Go ahead.
So let's go with like Peter. Okay. So Peter is told he's going to die like Christ. According to what historical tradition we have, Peter is crucified like Christ was, but Peter says, "Hey, I'm not worthy of this. Do it upside down." So he was told to do something that would harm him in that sense. At the same time, God tells us that we are to take care of our bodies because our bodies are a temple. Self-harm is against God's commands in Scripture in multiple places.
Right.
Yeah.
So why would God order self-harm if self-harm is bad?
What do you mean? Why? Like,
I guess
give
God
me
is
an example
good,
of God ordering. Okay.
So, okay, I can lay it out more syllogistically. Self-harm is bad. God is good.
Mhm.
Therefore, God would not order you to do something that is bad. Therefore, God would not order you to self-harm.
Mhm.
Doesn't that, the fact that he did and has ordered self-harm, doesn't that disprove God being good?
No, because you have to question what is good. Good is God. In the same way that Christians like to say God is love, it's not God has love, it's God is love. It's God is good, God is just. The theology behind that is it flows from his very nature. Those things only exist because God exists.
Have you heard of the Euthyphro dilemma?
Maybe, but not with that name.
Yeah, no, I'm not trying to stump you. We're talking about the definition of good, and you're basically equating God to good. God equals good, and the Euthyphro dilemma challenges that by asking, what defines what is good? If good is what God defines it as, then it's sort of arbitrary, and it's just his opinion. And if good is not just what God says, if there's some sort of external to God definition of good that sort of binds God, and so for God to be good, he must follow this definition of what good is that is external to him and immutable to him, then God cannot be all powerful because he's being controlled by this external source of the good. So he's either, good is either arbitrary or God is not omnipotent is sort of the dilemma there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so arbitrary is very incorrect, I think, because I definitely would push back, definitely say God is not controlled by an outside force, because to be God, God's existence is self-eternal existence, which is why when Christians speak of his attributes, I'm kind of a theology nerd,
Mhm.
so this might get a little into
Me
the
too.
weeds here.
Go ahead.
That's cool. A lot of Christians nowadays don't get very deep into these kind of concepts and ideas, but Christians have written about them throughout history, quite a bit actually. But when it comes to God's aseity, his being in and of himself, goodness flows from his being, and it's not arbitrary because God is God. So, in order to say something is arbitrary, you would have to say, well, you would have to be able to disagree personally, be like, okay, well, I don't think that's right. You do. For example, sorry, I'm getting a little confusing. Postmodernism, where we're at today, everyone has their own truth. Everyone has their own idea of what's right and wrong. You're not allowed to tell me what's right. I'm not allowed to tell you what's right or wrong. God is the ultimate standard as a Christian. I believe God is the ultimate standard of authority to tell us what is good, to tell us what is just, to tell us what is moral and not. And if you believe, as I do, that the Bible is God's word, it lays out, just for example, you have the 10 Commandments. You go into the New Testament, you have Jesus summarizing them in saying, love your neighbor is the second greatest commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself, and then love God with all your heart, soul, mind. That's the greatest commandment. But you're also told to everything we do when we work, we're working for God. We're not working for men. I mean, so I would definitely say it's not arbitrary. It's an absolute standard that doesn't exist unless you have God.
So
I mean, you'd probably agree.
The dilemma is more pointed than even that. So what it really comes down to is God powerful enough to change the standard? Or is God subject to the standard? So if he's powerful enough to set the standard and to choose the standard and to change the standard, which I think you agree he is, then the definition, the standard, is just his opinion. It's just what he wants it to be. It's just his opinion, to put it sort of insultingly, which is not what I'm trying to do.
No,
but,
I get what you're saying.
Good is just what he decides it is. So why should we care about that? And why should we hit our kids because he subjectively says it's the right thing to do? Just to bring it back to the subject of the video. Sorry.
No, you're totally fine. I think though, in any morality question, you're going to end up in the discussion we're having right now.
Exactly.
You have to, I think.
Yep.
So the reason, now I think I understand the dilemma. The reason I don't think it works is because God is immutable. He's impassible. He doesn't change. Therefore, the standard does not change. The standard does not change on a whim because God isn't some guy up in the sky looking down being like, well, today abortion's okay. Tomorrow it won't be. Or today taxation is justified. As in, like, let's say you can steal from your neighbor tomorrow, not today. Like, that's not, God doesn't change. People would point to places in the Old Testament where it appears God changes his mind, for example, with Abraham. But the Bible tells us God doesn't change. He's the same yesterday, today, forever. So part of interpreting the Bible is interpreting it in its own context within itself. So if God makes an absolute statement, I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning, the end, I don't change. And then we see a narrative written from a man's perspective saying, okay, well, it appears God changed his mind. We interpret the narrative in light of the fact that God has very clearly said, I don't change. So I can't see the universe from God's perspective. God knows, okay, I'm going to work with Abraham here, and he's going to try and barter with me to get me to not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. God already, I mean, if you believe in God and you believe God is all-knowing, he knows the future, you're already at the point where his mind doesn't change because if he knows the future is inherently set. So so the idea that God changes, the idea that God doesn't change, I believe nullifies the dilemma entirely from my perspective.
The dilemma wasn't that God does change morality. The dilemma was, is he powerful enough to do so? Is he capable? Did he set the standard in the beginning? Could he have said it differently is another way of saying it. Not like, to take somebody in the comments, Liberty After Dark says, if I never change my favorite flavor of ice cream, does the flavor I chose become non-arbitrary? Well, that's not what we're talking about, and I think that just kind of illustrates the difference in what we're talking about. If God even in the beginning and never changed it afterwards, I think there's some arguments we could have about Old Testament versus New Testament morality, but that's fine. We don't have to go there now. But even in the beginning, even if he never changed it afterwards, did he choose what was the good in the beginning, the very first time, or did something else choose and he's following that standard?
So in my mind, this is kind of like the question: is there a rock? Can God create a rock big enough he can't lift? And the answer is, I'm not trying to be rude here. From a Christian perspective, it's just an invalid question to begin with, because when I say that good flows from God's nature, good only exists because God exists. It's not something he says, okay, I'm writing a standard of good. Now I've created the world. Here's a standard of good. No, it is in existence because it is God. Goodness is part of God's being. And I shouldn't say part because, that gets into another technical term, theological stuff. But goodness is only of God. Therefore, because God is unchanging, it does not change. If that makes sense.
Well, I mean, no, it just moves the exact same dilemma back a step in the logic chain. So either God is not powerful enough to set or change his nature, or he is. In which case, we're right back at the exact same question about good. It's either arbitrary because that's the nature he chose in the beginning, or his nature is controlled by something external to him or more powerful than him that has set his nature to be what we call the good. It's the exact same dilemma, just moved up a step.
So we're not going to agree on that point because of eternality. God being eternal means that it's not, God can't change his nature. It's God doesn't change. He's eternally the same yesterday, today, and forever. Before time existed, before the earth existed, long after everything's gone. Like, eternity is kind of a concept that obviously I don't think anyone can really wrap their mind around. But when you bring that into the equation, if you're looking at it from that perspective, I just don't see the dilemma as being of a dilemma at all.
So
I think that's where
I'm not going to give up yet, because this is a clarifying point, and I think you can get it. Where did the definition of good come from? And you're saying it has always been this definition. Okay, I can accept that. Fine. Where did it come from? Like, did God create it? If not, then somebody else did. If God did, then God did. Like, we can go as far up the eternality, the inherent nature, all that stuff is sidecar. Where did it come from? Either he created it or somebody else did.
I guess that's the point I'm trying to get across. Good isn't created because God is not created, because it is his very being. In the same way, justice and mercy and grace and love and every attribute a Christian can think of to list for God. If you want to go the written definition or verbal, you could say that that would come down once God delivers the verbal word to the people of Israel, or Adam and Eve, to start with, tree of knowledge of good and evil, and back in the garden. So once God condescends to man and gives him a definition for him to work with, I mean, that might be the point you're looking for. But because I believe goodness is literally flows from God's being, and God is eternal, that means goodness is eternal. It was never created because God was not created.
All right, I'm going to try one more time, and then I'm going to let you off the hook, okay? One more time. Okay, let's say we're having a conversation with God, and we say, "Hey, God, why is killing babies bad?"
Mhm.
Or that's an inverse good question. We could say, "Why is feeding the poor good?" And he would respond by saying, in your definition, and I'm not trying to straw man you, tell me if I'm wrong.
Mhm.
It just is. And we would say, why? Where does that definition come from? And he would be like, well, that's just my nature. And we would say, did you pick that? And we would say, did you pick that nature? And he would say, no, it's just always been how I am. And how I am is defined as the good. And you would be like, okay, so it's just good because that's just how you are. Okay, well, why do we care how you are? And he would be like, well, because I'm God. And I'm like, okay, now we're in a circular argument. Like, or the other way the conversation could go is, hey, God, why is feeding the homeless good? And he would be, because I said it's good. And we'd be like, okay, so it's just what you say then. Okay, well, we're right. So it's arbitrary either way is the point
Okay, so
that I'm trying to get you to.
So you're focusing on it, I think, from our rationale. So why, when God tells us something is good, so I was going pre that, right? So goodness as a concept and everything exists because it flows from God's nature. But God has given us the rationale and the reason for, let's say, for example, for feeding the homeless, feeding the poor, taking care of the poor, which is something the New Testament, tells Christians to do. It says to visit the fatherless and the widows. It actually calls that true religion, by the way. It says true religion, undefiled before God the Father, is this: to visit the fatherless and the orphans and keep yourself unspotted from the world. Side note. But when it comes to the rationale for what is good, it does come down to what he tells us, because we do not know God as far as intimately know God and his will without his condescension and telling it to us. So yes, when it comes to us understanding beyond the level of conscience he has given each of us, the Bible says that everyone knows God exists because they can see him in creation, etc. The heavens declare the glory of God. But internally, it would be, we have a conscience, and that is because good and evil and right and wrong exist inherently because God exists. But when it comes to us understanding why it's good to do something beyond the innate conscience, it is because God has said, this is good. This is good for you to do. This is bad for you to do. Does that clarify anything?
No. But I told you I'd let you off the hook, so I will
tried.
hold to my word.
Sorry.
You are off the hook. We can try continuing that later. Maybe watch this back, and I don't want to. I'm going to keep my word and let you off the hook.
Well,
okay.
well, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So if you are perfectly confident that you have an understanding from God that hitting your kids is not only okay, but it's beneficial, and that is a faith-based question that I only have means to challenge through sort of reason and evidence, then this whole discussion needs to be sort of started over, and we can just talk about belief in God, because that's the justification for all of this, it sounds like.
Well, so there is a practical justification besides that. That would be the foundation, because your worldview is going to, as you said when you were talking about how we view authority in the home or authority from God or authority from the government, it's all interconnected. Your foundational worldview, or some people would call it your moral framework, is going to infect every aspect of your life. So it does inevitably come down to that. But I think there are evidence-based justifications for spanking. Again, I mean, my own children, I don't think are an exception. The other families I have seen, some spank, some not. Again, those are all anecdotal, right? So those aren't proof in the pudding, or whatever. But at some point, you do have, I mean, you can believe what you see, or you can be like, okay, well, these people in lab coats are telling me that this is the always going to have a detrimental outcome. And I may have caricaturized the scientists unintentionally. But I do believe you can see, and again, this would come back to in relation to training animals, which I've seen and done a lot of, or at least been adjacently involved in a lot of. I guess I would ask you, where would you say it's abusive to strike in any way, shape, or form, or inflict any amount of discomfort on an animal, but not a child? And what level of discomfort would even be okay on a child? Like if you're making them sit on their bed and they don't want to, why would that be okay ethically versus swatting them on the butt and being done with it?
Okay, there's two different questions. Which one do you want me to
There
focus
were
on?
two.
The animal rights or children?
Yeah, start with the animal one, because I'd be curious.
Okay, so give me the question again.
Okay, so when training, I'll use horse for example, because that's what I'm most familiar with. Spurs, good thing, bad thing. What do you think?
So a practical question or a moral question?
So we're going, I think they're intertwined, but practically speaking, we'll go practical.
Okay. Well, how are they okay. I will stop asking you questions and answer some of yours. Okay. So you're asking me, is it practically useful to use spurs on a horse? I don't know. I'm not a horse trainer. But I think a lot of them do. So maybe.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes. Inflicting discomfort. And someone in your chat said training animals in a conversation about spanking kids is certainly a vibe. I know it's an analogy. I'm not trying to. It's an analogy. Maybe it falls apart. Maybe
I have to give my chat props. Like they are not disrespectful to my guests, and
they're not. And I appreciate think some of them are on my side.
Yeah, sure.
I like your chat. One of the most chill chats I've seen on live shows. So
because I ban everyone that disrespects my guests. That's just how it goes.
That's a good way to do it.
I don't bring people into my home and then let other people make fun of them. That's not okay. Sorry, go ahead.
That's good. So yeah, it's an analogy I'm drawing. I believe that inflicting discomfort on your child is analogous to inflicting discomfort on an animal when you're training them, because that's a lot of parenting is training your children. And again, I think there is a difference between harming someone and inflicting discomfort. And I would say spanking done appropriately is discomfort, not harm. And I know you said you think it's arbitrary. I don't agree. I think degree does play a huge role in that. And I think we could correlate that to adults. There is a degree where you elevate levels of physicality. If two people are getting into an altercation, at some point it becomes violent. But before that, and maybe you disagree with me here, before that it might be approaching violence. It might be getting heated. And maybe you'd say all physical contact is violence. But if someone bumps into someone aggressively because they're upset at them walking past them, I don't think that's justification to turn around and hit the guy. Some people might. I don't. I think that would be escalating that.
I don't know of any other property crime that has an arbitrary line of severity that on one side is not a crime and on the other it is. So like, if I steal $1, it's still theft, and as if I steal $1 million. If I poke somebody, that's still assault by touch, just as if I punch somebody. And there's additional crimes that get added on if the severity is, really bad, like murder would be something where, I mean, it would still murder is still assault, by the way. It's just
yes, it is.
They have separate definitions for the words. But we're not talking legally, we're talking morally. So
right. And I think
morality morality is an on-off switch. It's not a continuum. Like when you evaluate an interaction between humans, it's a yes or no. Is that moral? Is that allowed? Yes or no? It's not like it's allowed a little. Like a little rape is okay. No. It's like
right.
It's a yes or no. And so, can I punch you non-consensually? Of course not. Can I poke you non-consensually? Of course not. Can I murder you non-consensually? Of course not. Like the entire continuum, it's a yes or a no. It's not a continuum question. That's why I brought it back to that with spanking. But you were making an analogy to animals, like discomfort. This argument is not going to be cogent for me because my conception of rights is that they're agreements between entities with the capacity to do so. And a bug does not have the capacity to even know what a right is, much less respect my rights. And so there's no onus on me to respect the bug's rights because the bug doesn't give a shit about my rights. He doesn't even understand what it is.
Right.
So, yeah, I just wanted to bring it back to your question about animals because I didn't want that to get lost.
No, I think that actually helps clarify what I was trying to say. If you have a toddler, we've both agreed they cannot consent. They don't have the cognitive ability to understand the rights and things of that nature. So I do believe, as the parent, I have a different level of authority than government has over me. When it comes to the government does not have the right to forcibly remove me from my home. Again, this analogy off the top of my head, they don't have the right to physically assault me or drag me out into the street because I didn't pay my taxes. They're going to anyway, but if I don't pay my taxes, but I don't think they have the right to do that. That violates my autonomy and freedom. When the child disobeys their parent, or let's say goes to kick a puppy or whatever, again, we've talked about whose ultimate responsibility is. It's mine. The child is not behaving properly. But we also understand children act out irrationally at times because their hormones are changing. They don't understand what's going on. And at that point, I do believe the parent has the authority and God-given authority and God-given right to step in and, if need be, use physical use a physical means of discipline. But again, the goal is correction and restoration. The goal is not to harm or harm is immoral. I think, and that's a very different line.
I keep seeing the spare the rod, spoil the child stuff in chat. There are some anarchist Christians that could definitely show you how you're wrong on that analogy. The rod didn't mean.
I have argued with them before
on that one. That anarchist Christians. Interesting. Which side were you on?
I have. So I am not an anarchist. I understand.
No, I mean,
a lot
which side of the rod debate were you on?
Well, as someone who lives on specifically a sheep ranch, I think they're very misinformed when they think the rod has nothing to do with physical discipline.
You whack the sheep a lot?
You don't even know.
I'm asking. I'm asking. I don't know.
So sheep get picked up, chucked around. Cows too. I mean, you hot shots. You zap them. You do use rods to, if you're leading your sheep this way and one breaks off, the danger is the entire herd is going to break off. So yes, smack that sheep if you've got a stick to guide it. It is a very real thing that happens often, that people who don't live in agricultural areas just really don't know how that works.
Somebody over on Odysee says it's referring to the rod of instruction, not a literal rod. What do you say to that?
Yes, the rod of instruction. But what is the rod of instruction? In fact, in some of those cases where it speaks of the rod, it's using sheep as an analogy. And the rod of instruction for a sheep is an actual rod. Like, I have friends who are anarchist Christians, and we've gone back and forth on this topic, but it's a fun one.
What's the rod of instruction for humans?
So the analogy being drawn is, it again, I've said I don't think you have to spank your children. I think it can be completely appropriate, because depending on which verse you're speaking of, this person in the chat has laid out several of them, and some of them are going to be in the context of a actual rod. Some of them are going to be in the context of, so for example, I would say scripture can be a rod of instruction. If you get into the New Testament, though, one of the interesting things people like to point out, be like, oh, well, when the Apostle Paul writes his epistles, he talks about God correcting and disciplining his children the way a father does. And that has no mention of a rod, no whatever. Interestingly enough, though, if you actually look up the word discipline there, in the Bible was written primarily in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. New Testament primarily in Greek. If you look up the Greek word there, when he's talking about disciplining, as God disciplines his children the way a father disciplines his child, it actually insinuates, or not insinuates, it means, it doesn't just literally mean, but it has this connotation. That's what I was trying to say. The connotation of with blows, physical blows, that is something people don't typically know.
We've got dueling chats here: YouTube versus Odysee versus Rumble. This is interesting. All right, so let me move the discussion forward, maybe towards the bookend. So every person that spanked, myself included, when I was defending spanking, would say things like, "I turned out fine," or "I find that my kids behave better with the quality of discipline that I use." Or like you said, you and your friends, your kids are better behaved than kids maybe that you see in other families that don't spank. And you also understand, I think you called this out actually, that the plural of anecdote does not equal data. I would definitely suggest that you look into the body of research, the wide and deep body of research that shows in every category spanking has worse outcomes. Except for immediate obedience. It gets immediate obedience, just like beating adults gets immediate obedience. The other thing I like to do is give them my personal anecdote, because a lot of people parent by anecdotes, and this is real. So I have parented two sets of children in 180-degree different directions. My first daughter was parented very traditionally, spanking, controlling, timeouts, etc. My current children have never been hit in their life. Like I said, they don't get yelled at. They didn't even know what that was until they were like 3 years old. They'd never seen that happen. And my current kids are vastly better behaved, vastly more well-rounded. I have a very much stronger relationship with them than I did with my older child that was parented forcefully. Spanking harms attachment. It harms the relationship with the kid in ways that you don't realize it is, because you can't be both kinds of parents at the same time. You can't be a spanking and a non-spanking parent at the same time to compare and contrast the two relationships you have with your kids. I'm this weird, rare individual that had one set of kids when I was very young and then started over years ago, and I've done it both ways. And so the anecdote I'm giving you is extremely clear. I have never spanked my kids, and they are turning out fantastically. And I have parented through my kids. I've parented my kids through situations that most parents don't even have to go through. My youngest daughter had childhood leukemia when she was 3 years old, and we went through. She's okay, so I'm not bringing it up to be dramatic. It all turned out okay. She's cured now. But we went through 4 years of some of the most brutal treatments you can imagine, where she was asked to do some extremely difficult medical procedures, and there wasn't a single moment in which I had to use force or coercion of any kind to get my kids through that, and we're all better for it. If anecdotes matter, my anecdote is to say that I have done it. The proof is in the pudding. I don't parent permissively. My kids aren't hellions. They respect people's property, because that's how we do things around this home. They don't go and destroy stuff and kick puppies and do all that stuff. Why? Because they don't want other people to take their stuff and kick their puppies. And there are very strong boundaries around property and consent in my home, and none of it was established with beatings of any kind. So that'll be my last word on it, but you're the guest, and so I want to give you your last word, and then maybe we can wrap up.
Yeah, I'm happy for you, both for your daughter and the fact that you're able to parent your children well. I think the most important part of this discussion would be that children need boundaries. That's really what I think my main point was. That, again, I may have misinterpreted in the original tweet that he had. The children need boundaries. Boundaries have to be enforced somehow. I do think you can, you're not going to like this word. You can discipline, spank in love. And that, again, that comes from my worldview of Christianity and all of this other stuff where we have fundamental disagreements. So I don't expect you to agree with me.
I said I'd give you the last word, so I'm not going to respond.
Yep. I appreciate it. But yeah, as a Christian, that is it. The morality of it really, it's all going to stem from your worldview. And so lots of people might agree with me. Lots of people might disagree with me. I despise child abuse. I really do. And I think that people who spank in anger often abuse their children. And that's where I think a lot of the negative stuff comes from in the practical aspect of it. I really appreciate you having me on to have a fun, friendly discussion. And it's been fun. This is my first time doing anything like this. I really appreciate you're a very gracious host, and I think you're pretty good at keeping things moving.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate you being one of the rare people in the world that is actually willing to show up for a discussion rather than just talk shit on social media. So good on you for that. And I would challenge everybody else out there, when you're engaged on social media with people that you don't know, and I would suggest that you either do one of two things. Very early on in the disagreement, if you really care about it, invite them to a real-time discussion. Phone, Discord, voice chat, video call, Skype, whatever. That will identify if the person's worth it. Or just shut up. Like, you just don't have to engage on social media, and the world will be a better place just from those two things. I didn't mean to steal your last word. You got the last word on parenting. I'm not going to say anything else.
Yep. It's your show.
All right. So, is there? You had some channels. You want to shout out your platforms?
Oh yeah. You guys can follow me on Twitter. It's at SethB_92. I got Twitter Blue, so I don't think I can change my handle anymore, or else it would be Utah Gun Guy. Utah Gun Guy is my YouTube channel. I'm also on Rumble, but Rumble's cross-posting is kind of not working quite right for me at the moment. And then I just started a podcast, If You Like John Wick. Me and my brothers are doing a minute-by-minute breakdown of the first film. It's called John Wick Minute. It's a very niche form of podcast that started with some guys who did it with Star Wars originally, and it's grown into this really nerdy community. It's fun if you enjoy nerding out over films, and I like John Wick, so that's how we ended up getting into that. But that's just John Wick Minute on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all that fun stuff.
All right, awesome. For my side, we have just started streaming on Rumble for the first time. You can get links to all of our platforms on disenthrall.me/platforms. Shout us out on Rumble. We're just getting the follower count going over there. In other good news, we just hit like a couple thousand on Odysee, and we have more viewers on Odysee than we do YouTube, I think. So good job, guys. You guys are awesome.
Wow.
Screw YouTube. Yeah.
Amen.
All right. Thanks again to our supporters. You guys are awesome, and we'll see you next time. Take it easy, man. Good talking to you.
Thank you. Good talking to you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.